there's a lot of awareness starting to come up with retirees saying, hey, we didn't plan as well as we thought we did.
I paid off my house, I paid off my cars, I don't have debt, so they feel our expenses are going to go down in retirement.
The average retirement time span now is like 20 to 30 years.
Yeah.
So prices will double at least once at a moderate inflation rate while you're in retirement.
You've got to be able to, when you're planning with someone, take that number and have someone illustrate out a benchmark that you have to set. So, Caleb, we've been walking together now in this business for a short while. I think you're in your second year in this business now.
Second year now.
And it's been a great journey. And some of the content for these episodes that we're going to be talking about have come from a lot from you saying, hey, Dad, I've had a lot of conversations now, been on a lot of calls with people, and here are some of the things I'm hearing, kind of maybe consistently with several people that you've been talking to. And those messages you're hearing from clients has caused you to say, hey, maybe we should do an episode on this subject or that subject, which I think is a great idea. And one of those being some of the misconceptions that people come with to a conversation about their retirement plans. One of which today we want to get into about people who sometimes feel like, once I get to retirement, I paid off my house, I paid off my cars, I don't have debt. So they feel our expenses are going to go down in retirement. And in some ways, there's probably some truth to that comment, but in other ways, that might not be the reality. And we're not going to tackle all the reasons why in this one episode,
Right.
But there were a couple things you thought maybe in this conversation today we could begin to address why that might not be the case.
Right. And I think it most commonly boils down to the fact that they're basing their decision on, I may not need as much money or income for retirement based on how things are today.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to be able to draw that conclusion because things are good today, but 20 years from now, they'll be very different, right?
Yeah.
Because living in the country and the world we live in today, things can change very quickly.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that. And
yeah, I think you just brought up a great point.
Yeah.
You just said, because like 20 years from now, that right there, I think is one of the keys because years ago, and yes, it was before my time. So this is a really long time ago, in your words, right?
Yes, yeah. Like I say, back while the dinosaurs were still roaming.
That's right. Yeah. Well, back in 1948, I think is the statistic. Yeah. Just
You were
after
alive
World
back
War
then,
II.
too?
No, I was not. But back just after World War II, when someone was, if they were a 65-year-old planning for retirement, that the average expectancy at that time for retirement was about 3 years. Okay. So a lot of the concerns people may have today were not a concern then in terms of retirement, because today people can, if you make it to the age of 65 today, if you're a man, you have a 50% chance of living past the age of 85. And if you're a female, I think it's 87. You have a 50% chance living beyond.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest risks the biggest risk people face in retirement now is longevity.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is a crazy thing to think about.
Yeah.
It's like me living a longer time is typically seen as a good thing, not as a risk.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But it is a good thing.
It is.
But it is also a risk.
Yeah, it's a testament to advances we've made in medicine and being healthy and all the education we can get now on how to live longer and a more fruitful and healthy life. But it does bring with it another side of the coin. And longevity, like you said itself, is not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be the multiplier of the other risks that people face in retirement, and a couple that we want to address today.
Exactly, right. And, many people think like they'll need less money, right? Because although some expenses do decrease in retirement, depending on your lifestyle, many do increase.
Yeah.
And so I kind of want to talk about some of that. But one key statistic I found, there's a retirement survey done, and in 2024, it said 31% of retirees found that they are spending more money in retirement than they can afford. Dated back just 4 years ago, only 17% of them said that in 2020. Now, there's a few things that might attribute to this, right? There's one, like COVID happened and a few other things happened in the last 4 years that may have made people more aware, like, oh, okay, maybe I should look at this. And the more they're looking at it, the more they're finding, like, oh, I'm spending too much money, right? They might have been doing it back then, but they didn't notice.
Yep.
And then also, you know, inflation has gone up.
Yeah. I was just going to say that was one factor that happened during the COVID
Yep.
crisis, right? Out of that experience was the inflationary in people's grocery bills.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the one thing to keep in mind is I think people are just becoming more aware. Like I think there's a lot of awareness starting to come up with retirees saying, "Hey, we didn't plan as well as we thought we did."
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Which again is not the end of the world.
Yep.
But it's good to reevaluate. So
Absolutely.
one thing I want to talk about here
Mm-hmm.
is healthcare expenses.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And I found some shocking statistics here, so I wanted
Okay.
to run them through by you. But so in 2023, a 65-year-old retiring couple, right,
Yeah.
would need approximately $315,000. 300? Did I say 100,000 or
315,000.
Oh, okay. I
Yep.
had a little brain fart there, but $315,000,
Uh-huh.
$100,000
Mm-hmm.
to cover healthcare expenses over retirement.
Yeah.
That's an insane amount of money.
Yeah.
That when you are back when you're healthy, planning for retirement, you don't necessarily plan for that
Correct.
$315,000.
Yeah. And some of the reasons for that is because, you know, one of the elephants in the room for many couples, and it varies between, you know, whether they're single or married people, is the long-term care discussion. Can be one of a very big risk when it comes to, because if people are living longer, the truth is that, you know, when you have the long-term care discussion, we're not saying that everyone ends up in a nursing home necessarily. But the truth is that as we get older, sometimes we become just more frail and just need extra help. You know, not everyone goes to a nursing home. However, whether I need some home care or I need someone just a couple days a week to help, or a family's going to come in and help take care of someone who can't, you know, just do the activities of daily living that they were used to being able to handle themselves. You know, this
Home renovations are a very common one.
Renovations
Yeah.
that can happen for some people depending on the level of care. And it might be a situation where some people start at one level of care and then it advances to a more, you know, around the clock type situation. That just happened too, like it did with your great grandmother.
Yep.
And so it's a hard discussion. It's an elephant in the room, because who here, or, you know, here or anywhere, people listening, who likes to envision themselves in that situation? It's not an easy thing,
right?
To want to talk. We'd rather talk about traveling and being with the grandkids and, you know, being with family and doing the things that are fun. You know, which we should talk about those things,
and which we do,
and we do. But this is something that needs to be addressed. And so when you're working with an advisor or when you're doing your planning, make sure that is a really, you know, one of the cornerstones of your discussion in retirement, because like you said, the $315,000 number that you quoted from that research, you know, isn't just Medicare necessarily, because the reality is that Medicare is going to help you with the four walls in the bed in the hospital. It's going to help cover, you know, when you see your doctor and get diagnostic tests. But if you come out of the hospital or you need care beyond just a hospital stay, and it's going to be for a period of time or maybe years, that Medicare does not assist with that.
Right.
You know, beyond, you know, like 20 days around the clock after hospital, you know, not a very long time does Medicare step in. So it's definitely something you want to plan, because it can be very expensive.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was actually just, you kind of went to my next point. I was curious, you know, like a lot of people have this thought, Medicare is going to cover, so I don't need a plan for this, but Medicare is very limited in what it can do. It can help you for some things, right?
Yep.
But it can't help you with everything.
Right.
So like what, you know, to somebody who says Medicare can take care of like retirement, like what are some common things that you have brought up that like people don't necessarily think about?
Yep. Well, if we're talking to people and say, well, you know, if God forbid you did need like assisted living or home health care, nursing care, what's your plan to handle that? a lot of times we'll hear a good portion of the time, well, we have Medicare, we have a supplement.
Yep.
And that's when we have to go into the education and saying, well, let's take a look and educate on how Medicare actually, what it actually does cover and what it doesn't. Mm-hmm. And when people's eyes are open to the fact that if they're in a nursing home for a year, that Medicare's not paying for that. That comes out of your own pocket, or you have some sort of another plan that can help with that. That's definitely an important thing, because it can, if it's so expensive, it can really wipe people out if they haven't planned.
Yeah, yeah, and those out of pocket expenses are one of the biggest things when it comes to healthcare and retirement in general.
Yeah.
That you can't plan for. I mean, even outside of the medical field, let's say a tree falls on your house or something. Like just random acts of nature that happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get in a car accident and you got to like fix your car.
Mm-hmm.
Something happens with the family. They're like, well, let's take a big vacation all of a sudden, like these things happen. And you're like, oh no, I didn't necessarily plan for this expense. And they can happen more often than not, which.
We'll be right back after this message.
So something cool you want to hear about?
Yeah,
okay.
Sure.
So people are enjoying the show. They're enjoying the content they're getting here. We're also going to have some other avenues where they can get some more value from some of the things we talk about. Many of the topics we'll talk about here, we'll even have an article form.
Okay.
And in our show notes, we'll be putting links to other articles. We got one coming out here shortly. That's going to be why a boring portfolio might be in your best interest. I think that will be exciting to read.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So where would I find that?
Well, it'll be in several places. It could be at the insightfolios.com website, which is the registered investment advisor we're with.
Okay.
There's a lot of articles there to consume, but there'll be a link in our show notes. It'll take you right there. And while you're there, you can browse other content that's going to be there. Also, too, a shout out to our other brothers in the fight here for financial planning, the Planning Made Simple podcast, too.
Yeah.
Paul and Kyle, that they do. They have episodes there, too. We definitely want you guys to check that out, have our listeners check that out as well. So, it's going to be great. And we'll probably be releasing at least 2 articles a month. That'll be there. And it'll probably be on Substack. It'll be at the Insight Folios website and maybe a couple other avenues. But you can always check the show notes. The links will be there. LinkedIn, other places. You'll be able to find the content.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Going on to another thing that maybe is like an invisible expense that people don't necessarily want to pay attention to is inflation.
Yeah.
And how do you keep up with that? I mean, even at a modest inflation rate, every 24, like 3% inflation rate, every 24-ish years, expenses will have doubled, right? And the average retirement time span now is 20 to 30 years.
Yeah.
So prices will double at least once at a moderate inflation rate while you're in retirement.
Sure.
With those numbers, right? And that's a very conservative number there.
Right.
And so, some industries that have, it says here, both sectors of food and utilities.
Okay.
They have seen above average inflation over the last 5 years, particularly affecting retirees on fixed incomes. Yes. Now I want to focus on fixed incomes here.
Yes.
Many people we've talked to said they have this pension. Social Security has a cost of living adjustment, which is nice, has that inflation adjustment, but they have pension. And they're like, oh no, we have Social Security and a pension, we're okay, right?
Yeah.
What's something that you've done that you've used as a tool to maybe help show people, hey, in 20 years from now, this is what you're gonna need, and this pension's not gonna keep up with that.
Yeah, no, that is a great question, Caleb. So when you're planning, it is always important to kind of know, within a general sense, what is your personal benchmark? For what to meet your obligations each and every year. Is it 100,000 a year? Is it 50,000? Just some sort of a number. What's your current lifestyle now, right? And when it comes into retirement, you've got to be able to, when you're planning with someone, take that number and have someone illustrate out how that inflation is going to affect that the cost of living adjustment on your benchmark that you have to set all the way through your end of your retirement, so you can see the total amount of income you're going to need first, and then compare it to what's coming in on that base income, whether it's a pension, Social Security, rental income. We have retirees that own rentals, and actually put it up against it to see if you actually have any shortfall. Because in our experience, and I know you've seen this now hundreds of times, that a high percentage of people we meet with, they all have a shortfall of some sort. And when they see that shortfall, how are you going to solve for it in order to be able to keep up with the rising costs of expenses throughout retirement? Not just including the healthcare expense, but just regular general expenses, like you said, your utilities, your food, if you're going to travel, all the things you want to do. Because at the end of the day, with the assets you've saved, what's going to be most important to you in retirement is how much cash is hitting that bank account each and every month. It's cash flow to meet your obligations. That's going to be the most important thing, because you don't have that paycheck from work anymore. And so you're going to want to create other paychecks in retirement, and you're going to want to make sure that it keeps up with the rising costs that are going to happen. That's the other longevity risk. Like you said, I'm living 25, 30-year retirement. Inflation is definitely got to be taken into consideration.
Yeah. And I think one thing that that I've noticed, a general theme in talking to people is, partially goes with the misconception, but it's a little bit more nuanced than that. It's like, we'll need less money in retirement. But I think it's because they feel like, sure, some people just want to downsize and live like a simpler life. That's fine. But I think sometimes it comes from a place where they feel like, oh, that's what we have to do in retirement, right?
Right, exactly.
And that's not always the case. Depending on the instruments that you use and how well you've done at planning and who you've spoken to, sometimes you don't have to
scrimp and save.
Yeah, sometimes you don't have to change your lifestyle, and sometimes you can even do more. And take the vacations and spend time with your family and make the house renovations that you wanted to do, stuff like that. But at the same time, it's found many retirees are spending more money in the first 10 years of retirement than they are during their working years.
Yeah.
Which, again, doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing.
Right.
If you're planning for it, right? And so I know we had talked about like some of the common things that are overlooked, like home expenses, maintenance, healthcare, inflation, financial assistance for children or grandchildren, if things like that come up, right? But so in general, we touched on it a little bit in each of these sections, but how does one plan? Like, how do you go about planning for these things? Like, let's say we're talking to somebody today, without knowing their situation, right? And they're like, okay, where do I start? Right. Yep. In a general sense, where would we start? Someone listening to this podcast now, what would be the first few steps that they could take?
Yeah. So I think, in our experience, one thing that can be helpful is that if you're just starting out to make a plan, or if you've never made a plan before, is that if you're going to talk to a financial professional that can help you with this, is try to find someone who's willing to build a plan or talk through it with you in the room while it's being built, as opposed to just saying to somebody, here's my situation, and letting them go and build something and come back and just show it to you. Try to find someone who's willing to build it with you in the room at the same time, so you can be a part of the process. Because when it comes to, and this will be another podcast episode, and we can kind of expand on this, but when it comes to choosing the investments, first, number one, can you identify if there is a shortfall in your plan? If so, how much? And then being able to take a look at the different kinds of investments that can help overcome that shortfall, and making sure that when the investments are being chosen, that you understand what you're investing in. That's really key, that you understand how the plan works. So that way, so that's why education is really important.
Yeah.
And not just necessarily just letting someone else just build it, and kind of passively not knowing what's going on. Make sure that you know and understand.
Right. Especially for, one of the biggest complaints I hear is like, I just want to get out of the stock market. I don't want to look at it anymore.
Okay.
It's like too emotional or whatever. But many times, correct me if I'm wrong, but it can probably be just as um, unsettling or stressful, or you're always thinking about it if you don't understand the investment.
Yeah.
And you're just kind of trusting that your advisor you talk to, um, knows what he's doing, he or she. But and they probably do, right? But it's like you don't have that peace of mind because you don't fully understand how it works, right?
Correct.
And so it's really important to understand how it works, and it's really important to look at all of your options too.
Yes.
The first one that you're shown, it can be a great option, right? It could even be the best option for you, but you might not necessarily know that if you don't look at other avenues as well, right?
Right.
So
being able to show, if you do investment A, here's how it impacts your income plan. This is how it helps with that shortfall we were talking about. But here, let's compare it to this one and choosing this investment and holding it up against the other one to see, does it positively or negatively impact what we were just looking at. I think that's really important to be able to do.
right. That builds a lot of trust.
Yep.
And it brings a lot of value too.
It does.
I feel like,
because at the end of the day, you and I are not making the decision for the client. We're educating so they can make the decision they need to make that's right for them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's very true.
Yep.
So, I think one thing on the retiree side, anyone listening, if you planned well, good. Like I'm happy that you have. If you're questioning, have I planned well? Just take a look. Take a look and reevaluate. What you've planned for income and expenses, long-term care, like all these things, right?
Yep.
There's no harm in looking at all the different avenues.
Yep. And the truth is, someone may come and do that, and we do a review with someone, and we may find they're in great shape.
Yeah.
And they may not even need us.
Right.
And that's fine.
And that's great. Music to our ears, because we're like, you guys have done well.
Yeah.
Good job. Keep doing what you're doing.
Keep doing what you're doing.
And enjoy retirement.
Right.
Enjoy time with your family or traveling or whatever is most important to you. Enjoy doing that because you planned well, right?
Right.
And many times if they are missing like a piece, right? Like they planned for expenses, they planned for long-term care, they have good income, but they didn't do any of their estate planning. Well, it's like, all right, well, we can look at that, but good job over here,
Right.
Oftentimes it's not like the end of the world, but it's always good to reevaluate. Even just like looking at it once a year really quick, being like, okay, here's how this is doing.
Yep.
This is my plan. Kind of gives
We're
you
on track.
gives you that peace of mind. It's like the idea of, if you're flying in an airplane and you're 1 degree off and you fly a couple thousand miles, you're way off course.
Right.
Right. It's the same idea as like if there's one little thing off,
better to correct it now.
Better to correct it now
than 100 miles down.
Than
the road.
100 miles down the road, right? Or a couple years down the road, and we were like, "Oh man, that set us off course a lot there."
Yeah, right. Especially because of time.
Yeah.
The time value of money and the different things you want to get on it as quickly as you can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, any other takeaways that you want to toss in there, or anything like that?
No, I think that's great. I think that's a good amount for this episode. Healthcare, inflation. I think those were two really good points that you hit well. And so, if you enjoyed this content today, thank you. If you can, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. We really appreciate the support. Leave any notes or comments in that section. We'd love to read them. And we look to being with you next time. Thanks.